Good morning. It is always a delight, in some strange way, to come to you when I'm not there. I am off in Vermont this Sunday. I spent this last week trick or treating with the grandkids, so we managed that, and then helping out my daughter and son in law this couple of weeks here as they're going through a possible transition in their housing situation. So that's what I'm doing back here in Vermont. I wanted to pick up a little bit on the themes that we talked about last Sunday, and that was the theme of the Reformation. That there were things about the contribution of Luther and the Reformers that I think created as kind of a trajectory that both has had I think, really a hearty influence over the way in which we understand our spirituality today, but also paints a kind of a new picture of how we can imagine God moving in the world in our time, right? We're given that opportunity to pay attention to that in a different way, given this sort of embrace of the ongoing reform that is always required to pay attention to the way in which sacred stirs in the world. I mean, that's just been the way it's been the way it has been for so long. I mean, we just need to pay attention to that. So I was thinking about one of, especially today as we celebrate all the saints and Martin Luther's notion that the priesthood in his time was reserved for a particular class of person, right? So Martin Luther understood that the priesthood was and the saints were a special class of people. And yet he began to chart territory to help us understand that it's not a priesthood of specialized representatives of the divine, but rather there is a priesthood of all believers. That together, you and I have a way of shaping one another's spirituality by the relationship that we share. We serve as priest and as saint in a way to one another. And it's a, if you will, it kind of creates this capacity for us not to be kind of configured in a way that matches the best that religion has to offer, but rather our spiritual lives can be shaped by our literal conversations around coffee and the way in which we interact with each other. Because that's what saints and that's what priests do, right? You spend time with them or you look to them so that they might add some character to or shape your sense of who you are spiritually or your soul or however you frame that. That's what they do for you. I look over the course of my lifetime and the long list of people who fill that role of saint or priest to me is mind-boggling. From childhood, people that were so influential in my childhood, Sunday school teachers, moments, experiences, my teenage years as a camp counselor, going to camp, music and singing in music groups as a student in church. And I can just go on and on and on. I know that my soul's character today has been touched and influenced by just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people who have served in that way, including all of you. That's how it works now. If you're buying into Luther's perspective on it, that is a beautiful thing. And today we honor and ring a bell in honor of those saints that we have lost in the last year, and so their memory is extremely close, and we can still feel them in our soul's heartbeat, right? We're emotionally connected to them. We want to honor those saints today, but we also know that the echo of that bell also includes so many other people that have had a influence over the way in which we see our spiritual lives today. I wonder as well if maybe there is another iteration to this notion of the priesthood of all believers. And this has just happened to me in the last couple of years, and that is ever since COVID struck and congregational life hasn't required as much of me, because initially, particularly, we were all just digitally connected. And I felt like I could kind of reach out to, in other ways, to the community and be a spiritual support person to them. Maybe I could serve like a saint to them, right? As a priest to them. But boy, did I discover something along the way that has really changed my perspective. And that is, I began to feel as if the character of my soul, the character of my spirituality, was not just being influenced by people who operate within the silo of my own religious tradition, but as I got in deep conversations with people, I realized that their spiritual character, the way in which they've constructed their spiritual life, that is much different than mine, has a different arc to it, different language set, different metaphors, different passions, different focus areas. I can go on, but the more I open myself to hear their kind of sacred story, the more their story is starting to affect my sense of who I am as a religious person, as someone who's on a soul journey as well, who is um, in a way, a collaborator alongside of them to understand how spirit works in our time. And that has just been an absolute wake up call for me. That maybe the next iteration of this idea of the priesthood of all believers is more like the priesthood of all, right? That if you can listen intently to the deepest sacred story of another, that moment together, that experience begins to shape your perspective of the sacred life. And thus you are at the feet of yet another saint, of yet a fellow traveler along the way. And I have just been absolutely blown away by the richness that has added to my spiritual life. And it's one of the reasons why I think I keep trying to find ways to open up those moments and those conversations kind of at a public level, like we did with Dia de los Muertos. If there's ways in which we can foster these kind of conversations with one another, whether or not we share the same tradition, I think there's some amazing magic that can happen. And my sense is that God moves in those moments as much as God moved in my confirmation class when I was in the, sixth, seventh, and eighth grade back in Wisconsin. So trying to really embrace that, for me anyway, has just been a new adventure. And so I guess I would invite you on this All Saints Sunday, on the day we kind of honor the many souls that have influenced our own journey. Maybe just um, three things to pay attention to. The first one is, really to acknowledge that you don't come to your spiritual insights or your religious insights on your own. You didn't make them up. We rub off on each other. We influence each other. We shape each other's um, perspectives. We spend a day like this one honoring that reality. And I would encourage you to both honor and to remind those who've been so influential in your own life, to be grateful that they have been a part of creating who you are today. And the deepest part of who you are today, this sort of, if you think about the soul, it's kind of this integrative function. It's the thing that you use that tries to um, draw your full sense of self into a situation or a response or an action in the world. It's a robust landscape, let's put it that way. Those people have helped you shape that robust landscape. So honor them and be grateful for them as we are today. So that's number one. I think that's just a great, we should do that more often, right? Um, and just talking to you about it, I'm flashing back to all the great saints I've interacted with. If I could go back, some of them obviously have passed on, but to give them all a hug and say, hey, you know, thanks a lot for helping me, you know, craft a meaningful life. Really, you've meant the world to me. So be grateful for folks like that. The second one, number two, is I would encourage you to not be shy about your own spiritual path and maybe be more assertive about wearing your religious and spiritual perspective on your sleeve a little bit more, right? Because we need to know and to hear from each other and from you, right? We even if you stumble over the language or you're trying to find your way, whatever the shape of your spiritual understanding is, it's not like you are going to impose it on somebody. They're not going to model themselves after your particular life trajectory, but you have influence on other people, and people want that. You know, people are hungry um, to bring together a more complex understanding of the way in which this whole religious experience, the soul's journey, moves, so that they can kind of integrate uh, meaningful content and insights into their own lives. That's how they're fed, and so being more open and disclosing about it, whether you be in a coffee conversation or you're with a friend who's coping with something, and you say, from my kind of spiritual perspective, here's how I feel about that kind of thing. Whatever it happens to be, have the courage to wear your spirituality on your sleeve because we need each other. And according to the priesthood of all believers, which I totally believe in, we need that from you too, right? So that's number two. And the third one, I think, starts to explore this new frontier if you're interested. And that I would encourage you to have ears to hear the sacred story that is stirring in the life of everybody you meet, right? There is a sacred story inside the life of everybody you meet, and you will be a better person if you simply ask enough questions to find out what the character of that story is. You know, just um, you don't, you might not recognize initially, like, the storyline, because you probably have a storyline that you're pretty comfortable with. This is the way it was for me when I first got started doing this. I couldn't quite hear, like, where is the sacred story in this for them? But the more you listen and the more you, like, have ears to hear that sacred story, the more powerful you begin to see um, kind of their perspective, and then it begins to kind of find its way into yours a little bit, right? So those are the three. One, honor the stories and the saints, present, past, and future, that are shaping your journey. Two, wear your journey on your sleeve so others can learn from you along the way and grow from you along the way. And then three, you know, try listening more intently to the sacred stories of others and consider them to be exactly that, sacred stories. So today, as the bell tolls and we remember the names of those that we've lost in this last year, and our hearts fill with the memories and moments that we've shared with them, kind of let the echo of that bell as it rings in the sanctuary today remind you of the many ways in which the Spirit's stirring resonates and reverberates in every life. And that's what we honor today. For maybe it's not just the chosen saints of old. Maybe it's not just the priesthood of all believers, but maybe there is a kind of priesthood of all that we can also enter into, acknowledge, learn from, and somehow celebrate together. All right. God's peace to you this day. Blessings on you as you remember those we've lost this year, and continue to live as saints to one another. Amen.